Before we begin, please share in the comments where you are located. Perhaps you believe major societal changes unfold gradually over decades. Perhaps you assume discussions about dramatic shifts in how we live and work refer to possibilities in the distant future. Perhaps you have never considered that some changes progress slowly for years until they reach a tipping point, accelerating rapidly and catching most people unprepared. This conversation is for you. I want to share insights I have been tracking for months, which have convinced me that transformations in how families live, work, and relate to each other are approaching much faster than anyone anticipates. These changes will distinguish those who foresee them from those caught off guard, potentially shaping their quality of life for decades. This is not about predictions rooted in expert analysis, economic forecasting, or conventional methods for anticipating trends. It is about patterns I have observed in how people are living their lives today, patterns signaling we are already in the early stages of a transformation that will accelerate dramatically over the next 18 months. I feel compelled to share these observations because remaining silent would be a disservice to those who trust me to speak honestly about changes that could impact their family's well-being, security, and happiness. Even when these changes demand difficult decisions about living differently than in the past, what is approaching faster than anyone expects is the end of the lifestyle most people have built their expectations around for the past 50 years. This is not the end of civilization or prosperity, but the end of assumptions about employment, housing, community, and family life that have guided how people plan their futures and make major decisions. The changes I observe suggest that within the next 2 years, millions of families will realize the strategies that worked for previous generations: obtaining a good education, securing stable employment, purchasing a home, and saving for retirement are no longer sufficient to deliver the security and satisfaction those strategies promised. However, what is coming is not merely disruption. It is also an opportunity for those who recognize the patterns early and adapt their approach to align with new realities, rather than resisting or hoping for a return to familiar patterns. Allow me to explain what I am seeing that leads me to believe these changes will occur faster than most anticipate, as understanding this acceleration is critical for making decisions that position you to thrive rather than merely survive what is coming. The first pattern I have noticed concerns employment and careers. The traditional model of working for a single employer for many years, receiving predictable income increases, and building toward retirement with pension benefits is vanishing far more quickly than most people realize. However, instead of being replaced by unemployment or economic collapse, it is being replaced by a more fluid and entrepreneurial approach to earning income, requiring entirely different skills and strategies than those taught in schools or developed early in careers. People thriving economically today are not necessarily those with the most impressive credentials or the most secure traditional jobs. They are individuals who have learned to create value directly for others through skills, services, and products that address real needs in their immediate communities. They are running small businesses, providing services to neighbors, creating products that solve local problems, and finding ways to earn income that do not depend on large institutions or complex economic systems, which are becoming less reliable and less beneficial for individual workers. What is accelerating this change is people discovering they can earn more money and gain greater control over their time and energy by working directly for customers who value their offerings rather than for employers who view them as replaceable resources within complex organizational structures. The second pattern involves housing and community. The assumption that success means owning a large house in a suburban neighborhood, maintaining it as an individual family unit, and commuting to work in distant locations is becoming economically and socially unsustainable for increasing numbers of people, yet instead of leading to homelessness or a housing crisis, this shift is creating opportunities for new living approaches that emphasize community cooperation, resource sharing, and smaller-scale housing arrangements that are more affordable and satisfying than the isolation and financial burden of traditional suburban homeownership. People are discovering the benefits of intentional communities where families share resources, assist with childcare and elder care, maintain gardens and workshops collectively, and foster social connections that make daily life more enjoyable and less stressful. They are finding that smaller living spaces and cooperative arrangements provide greater security and satisfaction than large homes requiring substantial mortgage payments and constant maintenance, which often isolate families from the support networks previous generations took for granted. What is accelerating this change is the realization that community cooperation enables people to live well with less individual wealth while providing better outcomes for children, elderly family members, and everyone who benefits from a supportive social network. The third pattern pertains to education and child development. Parents are recognizing that the traditional model of sending children to institutional schools for 12 years, followed by expensive higher education that may not provide relevant skills or lead to meaningful employment, is not meeting their families' needs or preparing children for the realities they will face as adults. Instead, families are creating educational approaches that prioritize practical skills, community involvement, and learning through real projects and relationships, preparing children to create value and solve problems in their immediate environments, rather than merely consuming information in artificial academic settings. These approaches are producing young people who are more confident, capable, and connected to their communities than peers following traditional educational paths who may struggle to adapt to economic and social changes their schooling did not prepare them for. What is accelerating this change is parents observing the results of alternative educational approaches and recognizing their children can receive better preparation for adult life through community-based learning that costs less and provides more relevant skills than conventional schooling. The fourth pattern concerns health and well-being. People are realizing that the medical system's focus on treating diseases rather than maintaining health is not serving their needs. They are taking greater personal responsibility for staying healthy through nutrition, exercise, stress management, and community relationships that provide emotional support. They are learning that many health problems can be prevented or addressed through lifestyle changes that do not require expensive medical interventions, and that the social connections and sense of purpose derived from community involvement are essential for physical and mental well-being. What is accelerating this change is people experiencing better health outcomes and lower costs through self-care and community support compared to reliance on institutional medical services, and they are sharing this knowledge with others facing similar challenges. Allow me to share a specific example that illustrates how these patterns are converging and accelerating, transforming entire communities faster than anyone anticipated. 6 months ago, I visited a rural area in North Carolina where a group of families had begun implementing these changes simultaneously, creating a model of community living that integrates employment, housing, education, and health in ways that support one another rather than competing for time and resources. These families had pooled their resources to purchase a large property they were developing as a cooperative community, where each family owned a small house but shared common areas, workshops, gardens, and childcare facilities. Instead of commuting to traditional jobs, the adults were creating businesses serving both the local community and broader regional and online markets. One family produced organic food for local restaurants and farmers markets. Another provided educational services for homeschooling families across the region, and a third created handmade products sold through online platforms. Rather than sending their children to conventional schools, the families educated them through community-based learning that included academic subjects but emphasized practical skills like gardening, construction, cooking, and small business development, through projects contributing to the community's operations. Instead of relying primarily on medical professionals for healthcare, they maintained wellness through nutrition from their gardens, regular physical activity through community work projects, and emotional support from the close relationships their living arrangement fostered. What impressed me most was not just what they had created, but how quickly they implemented changes most would consider radical departures from conventional lifestyles. 18 months earlier, these families had lived entirely conventional lives working Traditional jobs, living in separate houses, sending their children to public schools, and managing health through medical professionals. However, economic pressures, dissatisfaction with their children's educational experiences, health problems not effectively addressed through medical treatment, and social isolation affecting their mental well-being motivated them to explore alternatives they might not have considered otherwise. What they discovered was that making these changes together created synergies, making each change more effective and satisfying than it would have been in isolation. The cooperative business ventures provided more stable income and engaging work than their previous jobs, while allowing more time with family and direct contributions to community well-being. The shared housing arrangement reduced individual expenses while fostering better social connections and practical support for daily tasks like childcare, meal preparation, and home maintenance. Community-based education offered personalized attention and relevant skills at a lower cost than private school tuition, with better outcomes than the public schools they had attended. The integrated approach to health prevented problems before. They required medical intervention, improving fitness and mental health compared to their previous lifestyles. What made their success possible was recognizing early that employment, housing, education, and healthcare systems were changing simultaneously. And the most effective response was to adapt to all changes together rather than addressing each issue separately. They understood that economic pressures making traditional employment less stable were also making traditional housing less affordable, that problems with conventional education were linked to institutional failures making healthcare less effective, and that solving these challenges required integrated solutions. This is what I mean by changes coming faster than anyone expects. These North Carolina families transitioned from conventional lifestyles to successful cooperative community living in under 2 years, not because they were unusually capable or fortunate, but because they recognized patterns of change and responded quickly and comprehensively. The changes they made would have seemed impossible or impractical 3 years earlier, but accelerating economic and social pressures made alternative approaches not only feasible but clearly preferable to continuing with arrangements no longer meeting their needs. What is coming faster than anyone anticipates is the realization that challenges in employment, housing, education, and healthcare are interconnected symptoms of institutional systems no longer effective for supporting individual and family well-being. Those who understand these interconnections and adapt their lifestyles accordingly will discover opportunities and satisfactions unavailable to those trying to make failing systems work. The acceleration occurs because each family successfully making these integrated changes becomes a model and resource for others, creating networks of mutual support and knowledge, sharing that make further changes easier and faster for everyone. Within the next 18 months, I predict millions of families will begin similar transitions, not because they are following a trend or embracing a philosophy, but because changing circumstances will make alternative approaches to living clearly superior to conventional arrangements that are becoming more expensive, less effective, and less satisfying. Families who thrive during this transition will be those who see the patterns early and make changes while they still have choices, rather than waiting until economic or social pressures force desperate adjustments under crisis conditions. For individuals and families living conventional lifestyles and wondering whether to make dramatic changes or wait, these changes are not something that will happen to you. They are something you can choose to participate in or resist, depending on whether you find the alternatives more appealing than your current arrangements. If your job provides satisfaction and security, your housing meets your needs affordably, your children thrive in conventional schools, and your health and community relationships flourish, you may not need significant changes, regardless of broader trends. However, if you face frustrations or limitations with conventional approaches to employment, housing, education, or community life, understanding these accelerating changes could help you find alternatives that address your needs more effectively than trying to fix problems within systems fundamentally unsuited to current conditions. The opportunity is not to join a movement or follow a predetermined path, but to recognize you have more options for living than you might have realized. And some of those options are becoming more feasible and attractive as circumstances change. The acceleration occurs because people are discovering alternative approaches can yield better results in less time than expected. And they are sharing this knowledge with others ready to consider different ways of addressing common challenges. Your role is not to predict exactly what will happen or prepare for specific scenarios, but to stay aware of your needs and opportunities while remaining open to possibilities that might not have seemed realistic or appealing previously. Families and communities that benefit most from these changes will be those who approach them as opportunities to create better lives, rather than threats to existing arrangements, and who focus on building relationships and skills that make adaptation easier rather than trying to preserve systems no longer serving their needs effectively. What is coming faster than anyone anticipates is the realization that we have more choices about how to live than we have been taught. And some of those choices may provide better outcomes than the conventional paths previous generations followed successfully, but that may not work as well under current conditions. The question is not whether these changes will occur, but whether you will recognize them early enough to shape them according to your values and priorities, rather than reacting after they have transformed the options available to your family and community. Share this with someone who might benefit from understanding that major changes in how people live and work are happening faster than most realize, and recognizing these changes early creates opportunities for better outcomes rather than requiring difficult adjustments. Subscribe if these conversations help you think about social and economic changes before they become obvious, and about how to position yourself to benefit from trends rather than being disrupted by them. Remember, what seems impossible today may become not only possible but preferable tomorrow, depending on how quickly conditions change and how early you recognize the patterns, creating new opportunities for living well. How might your life differ if you understood that changes in employment, housing, education, and community life are accelerating faster than most expect, and that early adaptation could provide advantages rather than requiring sacrifices?